We are in this series on the 7 titles that Jesus speaks of in the Gospel of John, and I've got that image up on the screen that kind of playfully demonstrates the way that each of these titles, these I am statements, and there are 7, which is a number of completeness in the Scriptures, each of these titles leads us down into the depths of the fullness of Jesus' identity. And the question we're asking each week during this Easter season is a really profound question. It's a basic question in human existence. It's this: how do we live? What are we supposed to do? How do we live a true and abundant and beautiful and full human life? Because there are so many options out there, so many things that we can choose, and not all of them are going to lead to the true and good life. How are we supposed to live? What's the meaning of life? What's the point? And I think that is a question that we've got to ask ourselves, because as we heard a couple of weeks ago, it's so easy for our life to become not life, not living, but just getting by, just passing time. And so how are we supposed to live? And I think that is a question that Jesus answered, because when you look at his life, and especially what he says in John 10:10, that he has come that we might have life, and not just any old life, but life to the full or abundant life, the good and abundant life. When you look at his life, you see someone who did live truly, who demonstrated a way of life that was full and abundant, a life that I personally want to model and that I think is the best possible way to live, following after him. Now, there are 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John, and we're looking at one each week. He says, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door, the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the true vine. And Bonnie and Amy, our visual arts committee, have created a visual up here. And each week you'll see more ribbons going through this tree of life kind of structure here. And the colors are going to represent all of these different ways that the good life, the identity of Jesus is woven together. And so they've chosen red for the resurrection life, and they've chosen pink for the gate and blue for the good shepherd. And so each week you'll see more ribbons woven through them. And this week is in John chapter 10, verse 9. I am the door, I am the gate for the sheep. And here's what I hear in this passage. Here's what I hear Jesus saying that leads us to understand his identity, and his identity as the key to living the good and abundant life. Here's what I hear. If we take refuge in Jesus, we can lead the good and abundant life. So he says, I am the gate for the sheep, and whoever comes in, whoever follows me, verse 9, I am the gate, whoever enters through me will first off be saved. And then they will come in and they'll go out and they will find pasture, which is an image of fullness and abundance and of goodness. And Jesus says, I'm that gate. I'm the one that opens up the possibility of true life, life with God, life following me, true life wherever we're at. I am the one that's going to allow that to happen. He says, I'm the gate, walk through me. And you know, there are 2 different images here in John chapter 10 that talk about Jesus and that have to do with sheep. Verse 11 moves into I am the good shepherd, and they're tied together because he is both the shepherd who leads the sheep into that place of safety and refuge, and he's also the door into the refuge. It's kind of a parable that he uses. Both are tied together, and it's all connected back to what Jesus is talking about in chapter 9. If you check this out at home, read chapter 9 of John, because it really sets up the context. In chapter 9, Jesus has just healed a blind man, someone who was blind from birth. And the Pharisees, some of the Jewish teachers of the law, they say, well, that's great. We like that exercise of power to heal somebody. We're all in favor of that. But look what day it happened on. It happened on the Sabbath. Haven't you read the Old Testament law? On the Sabbath we do not labor. Yeah, so we got you there. And so Jesus then challenges them, as he does in some of the other Gospels, where he says, wait a minute, what's the Sabbath for? Is it for doing good? Is it for helping? I mean, even if one of your animals falls in a well, don't you go and get it out? And so here he's saying that you don't understand, Pharisees, because the Pharisees are testing Jesus' work, but they are not testing it along the right criteria. They are looking only to a very strict reading of the Old Testament law, and they are forgetting the spirit of that law, which is that we might live before the God who is alive, the God who desires us to live the true and abundant life, that we might be able to enter into his refuge and provide refuge for others. And so Jesus sets that up here. It's the context that he's speaking in. After he's healed this blind man, we find that not only are the Pharisees blind because they do not see what he is doing and the goodness of what he's doing, but they're deaf also. They do not hear what Jesus is doing. They can't hear the voice of the shepherd. And in this passage, Jesus lays it out, right? He is just very concrete. He is very straightforward. There are other voices out there. There are other possibilities for just life in general. There are people telling us how we ought to live. There are different options in our society, right? This is what it's going to look like to live the good and abundant life. But I think all of us know that not all of those paths are equal. So if you check out the magazines in the supermarket checkout line, you will see that it is possible to follow some of those paths and to have beauty and success and money, to have it all, the perfect spouse and the perfect children and the perfect suburb with the perfect minivan, and still not live the good and abundant life. It's still possible to mess it up. Because I think all of us recognize that there is something missing, something with a big S, deeper, that we are seeking after, and that is this spiritual element that Jesus is calling us into. And Jesus is pointing us to himself throughout all the Gospels, but throughout the Gospel of John. And he uses this self-identification, I am the gate. And then he connects that to, I've come so that you'll have life and have it abundantly. And whenever Jesus uses I am, that is not just any old self-identification. He's not just saying, hey, I am Jesus. He's using this ancient formula that you find all the way back in Exodus, right, where Moses meets God in the burning bush, and he says, what is your name? Who are you? Because I got to go back and tell the Israelites who you are, and God doesn't give them a name right out. He says, I am who I am. He is the great I am. And so when we see Jesus saying that I am, he is tapping into that currency. He's saying, I am the gate. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the door, the true vine. I am the light of the world. I am all of these things, and here I am, the gate. And what I hear him saying is, you'll come in, you'll go out, you'll find salvation in me, you'll take refuge in me. And without that refuge, I think it's impossible to live the good and abundant life. Because we've all got to have a place that we can go to when things get stormy and tough. When we don't know where to stand or what to do, we've got to have this place of refuge. And Jesus says, I am the gate. Come into me. Live that good and abundant life. And you know, this idea that he is the gate for the sheepfold, it's a really ancient idea, something that the people who were listening, they would have understood him. And so kind of imagine a sheep paddock. And in ancient Israel, it would have been kind of either something more permanent made out of stones, and here's a little image to help you envision this, maybe something more permanent made out of stones, and then have kind of a gate or a door on hinges, and the shepherd leads the sheep into that sheepfold at night, and there he's able to keep watch over them and keep them safe. Might have had some kind of thorny branches around the top so that no animal or no robber can climb over easily. Or it might have been out in the field more. It could have been a bunch of thorny branches all woven together so that it's not easy to weasel your way in, and the shepherd then puts the sheep into this paddock made out of branches. But here we've got an image of a stone paddock. And the shepherd has a song. The shepherd has a way of communicating with his sheep. He can call them in, and they will go to him for safety. And so verse 9 is really our key verse. I'm the gate. Whoever enters through me will be, what does it say there? Will be saved. And you know what? This is where we got to start, right? Because he says, come to me to be saved. And this is what everybody's standing on the street corner with this on their soapbox saying, Jesus saves, and it is 100% true. But we've got to pay attention to what it means, because it's not just this one-time thing like just get saved and then get on with the rest of your life. Jesus says they'll come in and they'll go out. They'll find pasture. It's going to be this way of life. It is going to be lived salvation. It is going to be a life that is lived in the presence of Him who is the refuge. So Jesus is the gate. He's the way into salvation, the way into abundance. Take refuge in Him. And He says, look, there's other ways out there. They're not all going to lead to the true life. And in fact, some of them are dangerous. I mean, there's the great thief, the thief of thieves. Verse 10, the thief comes only 3 things: steal, kill, destroy. Who is that great thief? It's Satan. It's the devil. He's the father of lies, the one who has always desired the destruction of God's people and God's purposes, who always brings down human life and desires to twist it towards ends that seem good, but that in fact are evil and destructive. But Jesus says, on the contrary, I have come that you may have life and have it to the full, or have it in abundance, the good and abundant life. And here he's talking about how we live into that life by taking refuge in Him. And I think there's a couple of ways that we take refuge in Jesus. And the first one, I think, is just the very basic sense of faith. And we talk about faith as being the assurance of things hoped for, and the hope and things that are unseen. We say, have faith. But faith is, at its heart, a very concrete act. And Rowan Williams, who's a pastor and theologian, says this: I believe, right? When we say I believe in something, when I believe in Jesus, he says, I believe is the beginning of how I speak about where I find the anchorage of my life, where I find solid ground, home. Right? So I believe this first step of faith that we think of is finding anchorage. Saying, this is my foundation. This is where I stand. This is my refuge. This is where I am going to stake my life. And here's the thing about faith. It does not mean that we have all the answers and that we have it all figured out, and that if we get into theological discussion, we'll be able to defend our faith with all kinds of theological and philosophical arguments. That might happen, but what it really means at its basis is that here's my anchor. Jesus is my foundation. I'm going to stand on Him even though I don't have it all together, but I commit myself to Him. He's my refuge. He's my foundation. He's my solid ground. That's what the first meaning is. It's this faith. I think there's a second meaning, and this comes in just our day-to-day life, right? Because faith can seem kind of nebulous, and there's a second meaning to this. And here it is. Jesus is our refuge. We take refuge in Him by saying, it's not all up to me. Can we just say that together? It's not all up to me. Now, I believe that, right? I mean, this is something that I think we see if we're really going to take refuge in Jesus. If we're going to come in through Him who is the gate, then we gotta just be serious about this. It is not all up to me. It's not all up to us. And there's one way that we say this where it is 100% pragmatic, where we look at our life and we're just like, I do not get to make all the decisions, right? Have any of you ever noticed that you don't get to call all the shots? I don't. We have different people, different interests, different needs that are all around us in our families and our friends and our workplaces and in our community. It's not all up to us. There's all sorts of different factors that are involved. And just think about it. This is very basic, right? We can plan a picnic, but it's not all up to you. If it rains, picnic's off. So, that is just the reality. And I think sometimes when we are, especially in places of profound stress and profound questioning, what do we try to do? At least what do I try to do? Just pull it all into our own laps, right? I'm going to do it all, right? It's all up to me. Everything's on my shoulders. I've got to do it all. And listen, there is a part of life that is up to us, right? There is a part that we are responsible for, and that piece, we are called to just pour our heart into it and just do it to the best of our abilities and to seek God and to seek some help and to do it with strength and creativity and intelligence. There is a part that's up to us. But it is not all up to me. This is a basic reality about life, and I think this is one of the ways that we take refuge in Jesus is that, hey, it's not all mine. I cannot take it all. And then here's the faith piece of it, because anybody could say it's not all up to them. Here's the faith piece of it. We say, it's not all up to me, but Jesus is in the mix. And we're going to hand that off to him. It's like what Peter says in 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your cares upon him because he cares for you. It's what Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, where he says, pray more, worry less. Right? Be in the peace of God, which passes all of our understanding, will guard your hearts in Christ Jesus. We're going to hand that off to him. Now, I know that kind of can seem like fudging it, right? Like we're kind of just making a little mental trick there or something like that. But I think in a faithful sense, it's just having a very clear-eyed look at reality that if we follow Jesus, we belong to him. And that means that our time and our circumstances and our life and our efforts, that belongs to him too. That he is in the mix and that he is able, that he is strong, that he is our foundation, that we can indeed place things into his hands and say, it's up to you. I need you, Jesus, because I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. And he says in verse 4 and 5, right, that my sheep know my voice, right? We're in this conversational relationship with him. My sheep follow me because they hear me, and I lead them into this place of refuge. It is simply following those words, that voice that he is speaking to us with into this place of refuge. And we'll never get to a place where we can just kind of let go and shirk our responsibilities and say, I'm not going to deal with this anymore. We don't get to that place. But we do get to a place where we have a realistic perspective of who we are and what we are capable of in any given situation. We take a step back and have a sense of detachment. And I think this is not wishful thinking. This is reality. As I've experienced and as I see it in the scriptures, as I think Jesus teaches, we take refuge in him. We remember that he is the one who, when the storm was threatening to swamp the boat, said, peace, be still. We remember that he is the one that said, I will never leave you or forsake you. We remember that he is the one in Psalm 23 who said, hey, I am the good shepherd. I'm going to lead you by still waters and into that good grass. He's the one that said, the Lord is the refuge of my life. In Psalm 27, of whom shall I be afraid? In Psalm 46 that we heard today, God is our refuge and strength. We remember that the God of the Bible is the one that the psalmist was talking about in Psalm 68:19, where he said, blessed be the Lord who daily bears us up. God is our salvation. We remember that he is the one that we run to, and that when we stand in his foundation, in his refuge, we will be well. Now, back in the Old Testament, there's this concept of a city of refuge, and we're talking about Jesus as our refuge. And the city of refuge, if you remember this, look at Numbers 35 when you go home. But city of refuge, if you accidentally kill someone, you're cutting wood and the axe head flies off and hits someone and kills them. It's a terrible tragedy. But in that society, the next of kin would have immediately sought to take your life to exact revenge. And so in the law of Moses, there are what are called cities of refuge, and if you have accidentally killed someone, you can run to one of those cities of refuge, and you will be kept safe until the kind of the tempers can die down, and you can live there until the high priest, in fact, dies, which was how it was later interpreted. And I like that image of a city of refuge because it's a place where we run when we are in deep trouble. Very concrete in the Old Testament law, but it's all throughout the scriptures. And I think this is what Jesus is saying. Come to me, I'm the gate. I'm the refuge. Come into me. Take some perspective, get some perspective, and take a step back and just realize, look, it's not all up to me. Jesus, it's got to be up to you. And I am convinced that there is no good and abundant life without refuge. I don't think we can live well if we cannot come to Jesus and take refuge in him. And I think the first piece of this is cultivating kind of an attitude of refuge, having that trusting faith, that mellowness of heart, that ability to kind of step back from the thick of things and say, all right, Jesus is with me. He won't leave me or forsake me. And it's not becoming apathetic. It's not fatalistic. It's just having a clear-eyed view of reality. It's not all up to me. This mess does not define the totality of my life or what this reality is about. So first, it's an attitude, right? This attitude of taking refuge in Jesus. We kind of cultivate that by reading the scriptures and just living our life with him, step by step with him. But it's also a prayer. And I like to think a little bit about the prayer of refuge, which I don't know if you've ever used that name, but I bet you've prayed it before, where you just have said, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. I am worried about this. I pray this all the time. I am worried about this situation. I am concerned for what's going on. I need you. I've got to take refuge in you. This is bigger than I can handle. That's a prayer of refuge. And I think it's through those kinds of prayers of refuge that we are able to find ourselves taking refuge in Jesus, the gate. But it all starts when we commit our lives to him, because in baptism, what we're really doing is dying to one way of life, the life of sin, and being raised to another way of life, which is life in him. That's Romans 6. And Paul said in Colossians 3:3, you have died and your life is hidden with God in Christ, right? You're dead to that old way of life. So those old situations don't affect you in the same way anymore. Now you walk with God. I think this is what Jesus was talking about when he said, take up your cross and follow me. It's this dying a little bit every day to a certain way of life and then coming back into reality and living with him and for him. And so I think a prayer of refuge is cultivated by this prayer of the cross, where each day we're saying, I'm going to die to that old way of life. I'm going to live to you, God. And it's just sitting with him. Not my will, but your will be done, like we heard a couple weeks ago in Holy Week. Saying, look, I take refuge in you. It's not all up to me. Jesus is our refuge. And the only way, I think, to really know this refuge is to live it. Right? To pray it, to believe it, but to live it. And it's almost impossible to describe. I mean, if you have never lived in a place of refuge, if you have never found yourself in a moment where you're able to step back and turn it over to God and stand in that pasture, that salvation that Jesus is talking about, if you've never experienced it, it's hard to kind of describe. But I am amazed at how when I talk to people, I sit down in your living rooms, or you invite me into these wonderful places at your hospital bedside or wherever. I am amazed. I hear there's so many challenges out there, folks. Life is just tough. But also so much faithfulness. And God walking with you and holding you up. Jesus being your refuge. And I'm always amazed at those wonderful stories of refuge that flow from a whole life of seeking God and following the voice of the Good Shepherd who leads into those green pastures. I've experienced this. We've experienced this ourselves. And I think all of you know, a couple of years ago, our little son Elijah had this cyst on his chin, this bony cyst, right? So you go and you get scans and you do that whole rigmarole. And the surgeon says, we need to do surgery. And you end up on this moment with your little child who's just this fragile little thing, right? He's your child. And they come for them and they say, it's time to let him go to walk to surgery. And I know that in the scheme of things, our situation doesn't compare to what many people have gone through. But this is our walk. And in that moment, they say, it's time to let him go. And you watch your little child be led away to go under the knife. The only way you get through that, in my mind, is prayer. Is taking refuge in this God who is bigger and stronger and able to hold what we cannot hold. I don't know what you do if you don't have prayer. I don't know what you do if you can't walk into his refuge. But you just got to turn over this little child and they walk off to have surgery. And that song that I sang from Psalm 46 at the beginning, that I discovered that in our hymnal a couple of months after we brought him back from his surgery. And it kind of became my heart song for a little while. I would sing that and was learning that song. God is our refuge and strength. Something that gave me courage. And I know that all of you have had these moments where you were encountered with something that is beyond you, that you cannot comprehend, or you cannot walk through without help. You cannot survive unless you have Christ, who is your refuge. I know that you have been there. And I think that's what Jesus is saying. Look, you want to live the good and abundant life? Well, the storms are going to come. The earth is going to shake. The cities are going to fall. I am your refuge and strength. Come through the gate. Here's the pasture. There is no good and abundant life without refuge in Jesus. It's not an escape from reality. It's just simply a clear-eyed look at things. We are not in charge. It is not all up to us. And you know what? I think this is what we should expect whenever we are really walking with Jesus, whenever we truly meet him, that he is our refuge. I mean, he said this kind of thing. Think about one of his greatest sermons ever. Go to Matthew chapter 5 and check this out. The Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor in heart, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Jesus says, blessed are you when you encounter the kingdom of God. And so think about this. Read the Beatitudes this way with me. What if it was words of refuge? The Beatitudes as a signpost of refuge, that the poor in heart, they're going to find refuge in me. Those who mourn, they're going to find refuge. Those who are meek will find refuge. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness will find refuge. The merciful will find refuge. Those who are persecuted will find refuge. The peacemakers will find refuge. Those who are seeking me are going to find refuge in me. Think about that. What if you read the Beatitudes in that way? Because they are a description of what it looks like to live in the Jesus way of life. And brothers and sisters, if we're going to live well, then I think we've got to learn this fine, trusting art of walking with Jesus, through Jesus, into the door of that pasture that he promises. If we're going to find refuge, then we've got to go through him. If we're going to live well, then we've got to learn to come to him for refuge. This means something else. You know, a lot of times we can just focus on ourselves and kind of worry about our own problems, which, hey, that's human reality. We find refuge in him. But if we have found refuge in him, then we are also called to a second step, and that is this, to be a refuge. And I love what Jesus says when he's preaching in his parables in Matthew chapter 13, verse 32. He said, think about the mustard seed. It's very tiny, the smallest of all seeds. But when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs. It becomes a tree so that the birds of the air can come and make nests in its branches. We want to be the kind of people who provide a refuge, who are like a tree with many abundant branches where people can come and find a refuge in us. We want to be safe people, that people can share things with us, and we're not going to judge them or break them down. We want to be the kind of people who extend our homes as a refuge to others, to our neighbors, to people in dire circumstances. It's the kind of church we want to be. Church of the Refuge. And in fact, I think that'd be an awesome name for a church. And probably somebody's used it out there, right? The Refuge Church or Church of the Holy Refuge or something like that. Because that's what I think we're called to be, this kind of church that has abundance, that can provide refuge for people who are hurting. Like the bird's nest, and make their nest in that tree. And I'll tell you a story. A guy named Antoine Flores Massonnet is an activist in an Anabaptist community in LaGrange, Georgia. And part of what they are doing is trying to pray and seek justice around the Stewart Detention Facility, which is run by a private company in LaGrange, Georgia. And there have been some serious issues there with how immigrants are being housed and the kinds of trials that they're going through. And so they have created, in this faith community that Anton Flores Massonnet, that he leads, they are trying to create a place, a space of refuge. And in fact, they founded a house called El Refugio, which means the refuge. And here's what he says. The pinnacle of this faith-filled response of mercy and justice has been the founding of El Refugio, a hospitality house that serves detained immigrants, their families, and friends. For 4 years, volunteers have joyfully operated a place of refuge. Free of charge, guests are received as Christ and offered a bed, a meal, a listening ear, an open heart, and a warm embrace. And whatever the complexities of our current moment with immigration, and it is complex, we have to all recognize that as the church, we are called to be the kind of people that seek the downcast and the brokenhearted, that seek to be a place of refuge for families in peril. And that's what they're doing there. And I think that's the call that God extends to all of us, that Jesus is calling us to be a people of refuge, right where we are, in our homes, in our church, in our community, a people who find refuge in Him, a people who seek Him and walk with Him and trust Him, and then open up that way of life to others so that they may come in and find that same salvation and pasture that we have found in Jesus. At the end, or towards the end of this passage, in a verse that we did not read here in the service, in verse 27, Jesus says this, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Brothers and sisters, that's what it's all about. He is the shepherd. He is the gate. If we hear His voice, we are growing and knowing Him and being known by Him, and we follow Him into this place of refuge. There is no good and abundant life unless we take refuge in Jesus, unless we extend that refuge to others. That's what we're called to. Thanks be to God.